Hey there, welcome to the Reinsurance Podcast, the place where we dive into all things reinsurance, the coolest part of insurance. We're your hosts, Jared and Ben, a couple of ex-practitioners who loved the industry so much we founded Supercede to tackle some of its biggest headaches. And we're here to share our insights and stories with expert guests as we uncover what's really going on in the industry.
And we're not alone in the studio
We're
today.
not.
We have a special guest with us is Christopher Croft of LIIBA. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And as tradition dictates, we must ask you, how on earth did you end up in the insurance industry?
And as I'm sure everybody who asks that question tells you, I ended up in insurance by accident. So I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, on the morning after the 2006 midterm elections, and my phone rang very early in the morning because it's 7 hours behind, and I ummed and ahed over whether I was going to answer it or not, and in the end I did. And it was a headhunter offering me a job in what was then the Market Reform Programme Office.
Very cool.
Of which I was very vaguely aware because I'd done some consultancy work with one London market broker.
Yeah.
But I ended up getting that job and then ended up running the LMG. So I was there for 9 years and then moved on to LIIBA, where I'm now in my 9th year at LIIBA.
Amazing.
Very nice. And tell the listeners, so the people who are familiar with the London market will probably know LIIBA a bit more, but if you could educate sort of the broader audience of the Reinsurance Podcast, what does LIIBA stand for? It's an acronym, hint. But tell us a bit about what LIIBA is and what sort of your sort of position to do in the market.
Yeah, so we're the London and International Insurance Brokers Association, which is why we call it LIIBA. Yeah. And we are the trade association for Lloyd's brokers. So you have to be a Lloyd's accredited broker to be a LIIBA member. Mm-hmm. Slightly distressingly, you don't have to be a LIIBA member to be a Lloyd's accredited broker. But that said, about 98% of them are.
Yeah.
And we are a very straightforward classic trade association. So we are there to represent their interests to regulators and governments. And given the second eye, the international aspect, that's regulators and governments around the world because they deal with a global client base. But also, very importantly, we're there to be the broker voice in the discussions in the market around collective processing and Blueprint 2 and things like that.
Very, very interesting. And just diving straight into this because it's already interesting to me, Lloyd's is setting up sort of divisions elsewhere in the world. You have Lloyd's out of Singapore and you have Lloyd's at DIFC and London as well. Do you guys play quite an important role in that work as well in helping them get set up for that? Or how did the broker role evolve with?
So we have a sort of interesting relationship with that. So we would say that we are Lloyd's global distribution network, so they don't really need to go and set up that sort of office. So it's generally relatively unpopular with our membership when they do that. So our main role is to ask them why they're doing it and what they're up to.
I think makes sense. It might be useful at this point just to, because you mentioned it a couple of times now, this term a Lloyd's broker. Like where does that idea come from and what does it mean in practice?
So if you want to introduce business to the Lloyd's market specifically, say the half or around half of the London market that specifically works within Lloyd's, you have to be accredited by Lloyd's. So you have to go through a process, not only to become authorised by the Financial Conduct Authority to be an insurance intermediary in the UK, but you have to go through a separate process whereby Lloyd's deem you suitable to introduce business into their market. So
that makes sense. I guess they don't want any random
no riffraff
coming in and bringing them.
And are you then working alongside that process as sort of a bit of a controlling role into how the brokers get supported in the market?
So we don't have a role in the actual accreditation process itself, but one of the things that we do see as part of our role is to encourage new entrants to the market. So I think it's important that the broking community is a vibrant and competitive marketplace. So we will happily engage with people who are looking to set up a Lloyd's broker and try and help them navigate that process. It has to be said, it's much more of a challenge to become authorised by the FCA than it is to get through the Lloyd's process.
Yeah. And I guess in this spectrum then of your membership of all these different brokers, you've got presumably quite a few different scales and types and sorts of firms, some that are London based, some that are overseas, some that are the size of an Aon, and others that are much smaller. How do you provide something that's useful to them collectively, given that?
It's a challenge. So we have 152 groups of firms that pay us any money, which is the most important metric for any membership association. Only 18 of those employ more than 100 people.
Wow.
So
Okay.
predominantly they're SME businesses. 80% of them employ 50 or fewer. So, yeah, delivering a service that suits a sort of 5-man family business at the one end and Marsh & Aon at the other is quite a struggle. And I suppose classically you will find that Aon, Willis and Marsh tell you that we spend too much time concentrating on the small members and our small members think it's all about them. But there's a lot of common ground, and we're a small organisation ourselves, so there are only 5 of us at the moment. So we draw heavily on the resources of our larger members to help guide and provide support to the smaller members through our committee structure.
Makes sense.
Very. Go ahead.
I was going to say, would you... This is interesting because obviously we're going to come on to, I'm sure, modernisation and all sorts of things around the market. But as LIIBA, then, would you typically find yourself, watch out, more acronyms on the way, would you find yourself sort of speaking to other trade associations on behalf of your members? So would LIIBA chat to the LMG and the LMA? And could you explain what they are as well?
So, yes, we talk to the Lloyd's Market Association, which is the trade association for the managing agents in Lloyd's. LMG is where the 4 communities of the market, so us and the LMA and the International Underwriting Association, the IUA, who represent company market insurers, so those insurers that sit outside the Lloyd's market but are active in London, and then the Corporation of Lloyd's itself. So LMG is really the forum that we've created because there are issues from time to time where we feel the need to have some sort of common opinion and possibly to take collective action. So often it is more effective to lobby the UK government through a single market level approach. Not always, though. So sometimes we like to be rude about carriers when they're not there. So.
But you mentioned sort of the importance of positioning that group towards leveraging sort of governmental shifts and regulatory shifts. But I think more recently, as Ben sort of alluded to, there's also been a really interesting role in how these associations drive innovation and modernization forward, which has been at times difficult and struggling, but you have different sort of perspectives and ambitions of the various parties. How have you seen, one, the journey over the last 9 years and the role the brokers have been playing or wanting to play in modernizing the market, and where are you seeing sort of the next few years and us going as an industry in that sector?
So I think if you look at the modernisation effort at the moment, and with due deference to everybody involved, not much of it is new ideas. It's stuff that we've tried before and that hasn't worked. But that doesn't stop them being the right ideas. And what I would say in this iteration, and why I'm much more confident that it'll be successful, is that you do now, certainly in our larger members, have very sophisticated digitalisation programs that they want to run as part of them being efficient global organisations, and the sort of Blueprint 2 proposals are a part of that, so they need it to work for their wider transformation ambitions to work, and I'm not sure that's been quite the case previously. So our role in all those discussions is to ensure there's sufficient mention of the C word, because people forget about clients unless they're constantly reminded. And if what we do isn't entirely focused on delivering better, cheaper products for our clients, then there's not much point.
And you oversee brokers, because Lloyd's brokers will be both insurance and reinsurance brokers. You think of then the insurers operating with both the capacity providers for the insurance brokers, but also cedents in the reinsurance space. You're trying to keep a lens as to how we're delivering value to them on both sides. So I think the cedents get a kind of double dip in some points, where you're getting innovation support from them on helping the end consumers, and you get support from them as they sort of think about being outwards carriers.
What's interesting and doesn't get discussed that much, and maybe we should discuss it more, is how philosophically different a reinsurance placement is to an insurance placement. And you see that best in the pieces of software that have been built to support it. So you look at something like PPL, Placing Platform Limited, which is the predominant electronic trading platform in the London market. It is basically a glorified piece of workflow software to guide the passage of a slip through a negotiation process to fulfillment. The reinsurance platforms that the likes of our largest members have developed are totally different. They're really data driven. They're about the ability to exchange vast amounts of modelling data with their cedent clients and with the end reinsurers. So reinsurance is much more dependent, I would say, at the moment on the interpretation of large amounts of data rather than on a sort of deal negotiation. But I think that may change in the direct sphere over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, for sure. And there's always going to be a need for like just improved speed and efficiency that comes from just being faster. But you're right. When you look at the insurance products, the velocity there is a lot more important. Where like in reinsurance, improved velocity matters, but the way the deals come, the frequency and the volume of deals means that it's not thought about in the exact same way. It's like there's other things that matter. The amount of data you're able to ingest, how you share that data effectively, how you get the component parts of the information transferred over in many ways is more important versus like how the bigger insurance market wants to sort of receive huge requests for quotes, get them processed, move them through, and identify what you're going to want to write and not write.
And the challenge for that in the broker sphere is back to it being a vibrant competitive community, because the barrier to entry for new reinsurance brokers is pretty high just because you have to own vast amounts of very expensive software. Yeah. So you see the reinsurance broking market dominated by the large players. Yeah. And there are smaller reinsurance brokers, but not that many of them.
Yeah. One of the things that we've seen as we build software, which it has a similar sort of experience as probably what you have, is we have client base that sort of falls into two camps, like the really large, sophisticated group that has one set of needs, and this longer tail of much smaller firms that thinks about different challenges altogether. Like across your membership base, like what is sort of the things that they agree on, that they both are saying we should do this, and they're sort of a unifying, charge statement there? And where do you see the biggest deviation between firms that want X and the others like, so that hurts us in benefits them more? Do you see that dynamic happening?
To a degree. So I don't think it's a question of that benefits them and that hurts us, but given the size of our members, so we have a few firms who are sitting there looking at Blueprint 2 proposals and thinking, how big are the operational savings I'm going to make as a result of this? Yeah. Our smaller members are thinking, how am I going to afford this? Yeah. Because it's going to be an investment in new technology that they won't. So there's just not enough of them to save a person. They might free up a bit more of one person's time. Yeah.
I remember a few people saying, I think you were quite active as an organisation as well in help making sure the designers of some of the new requirements took account of the fact that making a broker add many, many more data fields at the start of the placement was actually quite a lot to ask for some of these clients.
Yeah, I mean, brokers don't really have long-held ambitions to be data capture clerks for insurers, and B, it's even more difficult when people try and ask you for bits of data that don't actually exist.
Yeah. Completely. Yeah. And I guess that would be the risk, wouldn't it, of having no broker voice in this place. We talk about the brilliance of the London market and all of the capital and expertise and licenses and ratings, etc. But if they just moved, of their own, if that LMG was missing the broker element, you can imagine how difficult it would be for brokers to actually bring them business, because they'd forget things like that.
Well, and I think when you look at, and this is kind of the core of the data challenge our industry sometimes has, but everyone looks at it from like, what do they benefit from it, right, in many ways, and as they should. But you have it where, as to your sort of protectionist position of the brokers, which is the right place to be, like, we need to enter these 95 additional data points. It's like, these people are also busy and have other things to do, and none of them are going to sit there and fill out loads and loads if they don't get any benefit from it. If there was something where it's like, and there I do it because at the end, I get all this insight from this information. That's a different conversation. But so many of times these conversations have started by just do this thing. And if there's not enough of a value proposition aligned with that, the position absolutely should be pushing back saying, listen, we're happy to help where we can. We're happy to sort of contribute our share of this as well. But we're not going to be the ones who are just assuming all the data clerk, it's like uploading work on behalf of other parties if they're getting the same sort of contract documents and things that everybody else is getting.
Yeah, so a very parochial characterization of the data debate
Yeah.
for the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, is carriers have tended to come into conversations and say, you've got loads of data, we want you to send it to us because we're nosy. And our response has been, can you tell us how that will help you provide better, cheaper coverage for our clients?
Yeah.
And they went, we haven't really thought about that.
Yeah.
And that's why we haven't done it.
Yeah.
But that is changing.
Yeah.
I think with the discussions we have with the Data Council and around the core data record, I think we've got to a pragmatic answer on that question.
Yeah. Well, then that's the right way to frame it, right? Because I think if you're given the option of getting more data, everyone always takes that, says, yeah, we'll take the more, even if you do nothing with it. So I think it's absolutely the right position to say, yeah, we're happy to contribute to this, but like, what is it for? And if it's just you to, like, if there's no convincing answer there, then pushing back and saying, well, until you know what you're going to do with it and why, like, the added burden of us sort of sending it to you and you having questions about it, like this back and forth we've created around nothing of sort of directional focus isn't benefiting anybody.
And I think it's always important to remember that the insurance purchase comes at the end of a suite of services that our members provide to their clients that go way beyond just being a transactional insurance broker, because so they are increasingly risk management consultants and risk management specialists. So the number of pure insurance professionals that our members employ is surprisingly low, because they employ people who are experts in the lines of business of their clients. Because they need to be able to go in and have a discussion about the full gamut of risks that business faces and come up with the best way of mitigating those risks. And it's only in some circumstances that that'll involve purchasing insurance. So actually, in a slightly counterintuitive way, our broker's job is almost to talk their clients out of buying insurance because they found a better way of dealing with a particular risk.
Do you think, given this sort of raising Bath or modernisation, etc., there will be a growing specialisation of the London broker versus other brokers? And maybe it's also a convenient opportunity to distinguish between LIIBA and BIBA, for example. What does it mean to be in that LIIBA group as opposed to more generally a broker in the UK?
So our members are primarily dealing with complex commercial insurance with sophisticated corporate clients from around the world, and BIBA members are selling personal lines insurance to the members of the general public. It's the easiest way to think about it.
Yeah, makes sense. And so it wouldn't make sense necessarily unless, I mean, you get some funny elite athlete insurance maybe or something, or otherwise that involve individuals, but it probably means that you're going to have a bit of a bifurcation.
If you wander through the underwriting room in the Lloyd's building and you see a broker and underwriter sitting there like watching Sky Sports on their laptop, it could be that they're just messing around and wasting time, but it is quite often because they insure the legs of Marcus Rashford. Yeah,
very nervous about aggressive slide tackles and similar as I'd imagine.
Diego Jota's would be unhappy with the news today.
But you touched on a point that we've raised a number of times on the podcast that's, I think, is really, really interesting, is that it's very easy to think about the role of the broker being one that helps source capacity that's needed by a client, whether that's a cedent as the client or a commercial consumer. But in reality, you're right, it's vastly more nuanced and complex than that. And it's in a combination of helping mitigate risk, structuring what various programs should look like, helping arrange everything from, I've seen everything from warehouse remodeling sort of approaches and really detailed sort of risk mitigation strategies. And then also here are the ways you have risk against like property damage, obviously, but also casualty and components of if there's a pandemic and the business is unoperational, like how are you protecting against those sorts of things? Like being able to sort of canvas a company and understand the breadth of risks that they're exposed to, and then create a program that says, okay, you need these policies for these different things, and then we'll help you get the capacity for it.
Yeah.
But like the getting of the capacity, as you said, is the very last step after you've gone through this exercise, right?
Yeah. Also, quite often the only step you get paid for, which
Yeah.
is a bit of a challenge sometimes.
Yeah.
No, that's the dependable advisor. And so we talked a bit about modernisation and obviously getting insurance. Dealing with the various associations around London. What are the other main topics nowadays that come up across the LIIBA group that you're asked to sort of collectively represent or knowledge share on?
So obviously we're interested in what's happening election-wise around the world really this year. So we'll have a new government in the UK at some point. If that is at least in part formed by the Labour Party, we're quite encouraged by the sorts of noises they're making towards financial services. They published a document a couple of weeks ago, so really we think we've made quite significant progress in the last few years with the new Financial Services and Markets Act, which has restored an objective for the regulators to facilitate international competitiveness and economic growth. And we are genuinely seeing some positive developments in the FCA's attitude to our community off the back of that, and actually hope to be able to circulate some stuff later this week on that.
Very nice.
So we're encouraged that the Labour Party are putting forward sort of proposals of continuity around that sort of stuff. So they're not looking to rip up stuff that the current government has put in place. And indeed, their proposal to have, I think they call it the Regulatory Innovation Office, but a special body set up to try and keep the regulators honest to that objective, is something we did propose as part of the lobbying around the Act, but wasn't taken up. So that would be a positive step further. So that's going to be a big impact. So obviously, along with many trade associations, we're trying to befriend members of the Labour Party.
I can imagine.
But 35% of Markets business comes from North America, so the outcome of elections in November will be quite pivotal to that.
Yeah.
And it will be interesting. Do you have a quite protectionist, climate, not denying, but climate suspicious president elected, or Joe Biden?
Yes. It's a really interesting one, because especially if we sort of rewind through your tenure over the last sort of 9 years, the role of governments plays a huge role in sort of how we think about positioning businesses and similar. But we've had in that tenure a couple really shock political events that probably you're going to bed going, okay, tomorrow this is going to be kind of where we'll be, etc. And then very quickly having to sort of recalibrate or think through maybe what has changed now. What are those experiences like for you?
It's quite interesting. So obviously, I have presided over LIIBA through the Brexit referendum, and through the FCA's wholesale insurance broker market study, which was quite a big thing in our lives for a while. And interestingly, Brexit's a challenge in itself, and maintaining access to EU clients for our members has been a lot of what we've done for the last 8 years, and we continue to do. It's still a live issue, and there remains elements in the European Union who'd like to see it put a stop to it. We try and resist that as best we can. But what it's in a wider context and a sort of more global context, what it has opened up is a focus on multinational placements that probably wasn't there in the past. And I think what Brexit has highlighted is that the legal basis of a lot of that international trade in insurance is quite flaky. And basically there was a sort of general agreement that it was quite important that happened, and no one really paid much attention to it. But now Brexit has forced a focus on that. So our concern in the next period is, will that become, will this be something that international regulators become more interested in? So bodies like the IAIS, the International Association of Insurance Supervisors. So we need to ensure that they are comfortable with how this business is conducted, and emphasise that it's sophisticated customers dealing with sophisticated counterparties. And so the sort of fundamental argument in favour of regulation that there's information asymmetries in the market probably doesn't exist around those sorts of placements. So they can be comfortable that there's less need for regulatory intervention. But it's no one went to bed on whenever it was in June 2016 and thought the entire legal basis of a vast amount of international business is about to be brought into question.
And then you had a pandemic to deal with not long after that as well.
So I was say we publish at the end of January every year what we call the LIIBA agenda, so the sort of vague plans for the year, and we now, I think, have a standard paragraph at the end of it which says, this is what we're thinking of doing. But in January 2020, we didn't say we will be spending next much of the rest of the year helping our members come to terms with the global pandemic and all being stuck at home. But that's what we ended up doing.
What sort of support did you offer to members during that time?
So quite a lot of it was just being there to have a chat. Because brokers are people, and they were stuck in their houses not seeing people, and I think it really affected them quite a lot. So we did, I think for the first 64 days of lockdown, we sent an email out every day with these are some things that you need to think of, but actually it just extended into here's some things we've noticed on the news and some very bad jokes. But
your audience, that probably went down the street.
People do still mention it as that they used to look forward to the 5 o'clock when the email would arrive. It would be a little sort of ray of sunshine in their otherwise dreary day, locked in with the dog snoring in the back.
No, Chris, this has been a super interesting conversation. Thanks for joining on the podcast. The role that LIIBA plays in this market and sort of how Lloyd's is sort of growing, how we drive sort of broker engagement in the market is super, super fascinating. So appreciate the work you guys are doing. We're actually massive broker fans as well from my background. So we lean into what you guys do and support that effort. Excellent. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Reinsurance podcast. If you enjoyed our show, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review to let us know how we're doing, preferably 5 stars. For more insights and updates, follow us on LinkedIn and visit our website at supercede.com/podcasts.